Going into the Navy at her age? That's not bravery. That's desperation. That's what he said, my own father, while I stood just feet away. He didn't whisper it. He didn't care who heard. What he didn't know was that just a few hours later, the name announced over the loudspeaker wouldn't be his golden boy grandson. It would be mine. And the room would rise to its feet. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The folding tables were lined up like drill formations, red and white checkered cloths, stiffened by the wind that swept in from the edges of Dorian's backyard. Balloons clung to lawn chairs, as if even they felt out of place. The porch speaker bled Fleetwood Mac at a hush, swallowed by polite chewing and forced laughter. My father's 70th was meant to be low-key, but the tension hung heavier than the grill smoke. I had spent the night before wrapping a small box. Nothing fancy, just something personal, something I knew he wouldn't notice unless it came from someone else. I palmed the small box and tracked him from behind a row of plastic chairs. He was in his element, holding court like a man who believed the world still spun because he'd once been sheriff of a county no one could spell right. Then Colby arrived, all 6-foot-something of him, broad shoulders and Boise State jacket zipped halfway down to show off his new recruitment shirt. Dorian's face kicked on like stadium lights before kickoff. "Make room! Colby's here!" he called out. "Danielle, move those chairs up. Let's leave the front row for the achievers." He never glanced my way. He didn't need to. A small beat opened, just wide enough to push me to the edge of the frame. I smiled like I didn't hear it, like I hadn't just been pushed off the edge of the family photo. I stepped back, adjusting my stance as if the earth had tilted slightly. One cousin half joked, "You want to take the picture?" I declined. No one insisted. They took the photo without me naturally. I found myself drifting toward the folding table with the lemonade, eyes scanning faces that blurred into one another. Someone's kid bumped into me, sticky fingers brushing my sleeve. I didn't mind. Then I heard him again, this time leaning toward a neighbor from church, voice dipped low but sharp as ever. Going into the Navy at her age? That's not bravery. That's desperation. I kept my face flat, set the gift beside the punch bowl, and slipped around the house, boots crunching the gravel. No one followed, and no one asked why. A breeze pushed through the oak trees, brushing against my hair like a memory I didn't ask for. The kind that reminds you how invisible you've become, even in places that used to know your name. The road bled light in uneven streaks beneath my tires, the rain dancing across the windshield like it was trying to cover something up. I left the glass streaked. The blur told the truer story, a single smear, easier than a sharp view. No music, no talking GPS, only the tire hiss on wet pavement and the low drone of an engine that could find home blind. A gust of wind shoved at the side of the car, tugging slightly at the wheel. I kept it straight, kept my hands at 10 and 2, not because I needed to, but because it gave me something to hold. My eyes stayed dry, my gaze steady as the road unraveled ahead. The smell of smoked meat still clung to my jacket, something greasy, like old charcoal and pride. It mixed with the stale scent of the coffee I'd left in the cup holder that morning. Bitterness layered over bitterness. I didn't roll the window down. I wanted to sit with it. My phone buzzed once, then again, then nothing. I didn't look. It was probably Colby's highlight reel sent through the family group chat, or maybe another angle of the birthday toast I wasn't invited to stand near. I let it buzz. Let it fall quiet. At the next red light, I reached for my wallet out of habit. The leather was worn at the edges, stitching loose in one corner, and tucked deep inside, folded into quarters so many times the creases had softened. The letter. Not a ceremonial one. Not from any superior officer, but from Thayer. The ink had faded just enough to blur at the edges, but his handwriting, quick, a little rushed, slightly slanted, was still steady. You don't need anyone's permission to be enough. He'd written that when I graduated OCS, The one person in my family who bought a plane ticket showed up in a wrinkled shirt and jeans and held up a hand-lettered sign that read, "Lieutenant Scott, about damn time." He'd been my only witness that day. Everyone else had stayed home, or simply forgot. I used to believe that the next milestone would change something, that if I hit just one more achievement, I'd be allowed into that invisible circle Dorian reserved for people worth celebrating. That maybe he'd say, just once, "I'm proud of her." Certain rooms were never built to hold you, and certain people miss you entirely because they never choose to look. When I was 7, I climbed the maple tree in our backyard to spy on poker night. I stayed tucked between the branches, shivering in the dark, listening to their laughter. I remember waiting, desperate for my name to come up. It never did. They talked about football, politics, someone's new truck. Not about me. I wasn't a secret. I was just forgettable. It's strange how those things follow you. I joined the Navy, made rank, deployed, commanded, restructured entire departments. But somewhere under the ribbons and ceremony, I was still that kid in the tree, straining to hear if I mattered. By the time I pulled into the base, it was past 3 a.m. The guard gave a lazy salute and lifted the barrier without making eye contact. My parking spot was waiting, slick with rain, the overhead lights casting ghost-pale reflections on the asphalt. The building was silent except for the low buzz of the emergency lights and the hum of the hallway vending machine. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have. I unlocked my office, pushed the door with my shoulder, and paused. A soft glow pooled on the surface of my desk. There it sat, centered, perfect. A cream-colored folder, sealed with a red wax stamp, clean, sharp, and old-fashioned. Just above it, in bold black font, Rear Admiral Nomination Packet, Confidential. I locked in place not from fear, but as if disbelief were checking my joints. I stepped forward. My shadow moved across the desk like it belonged to someone else. The wax hadn't been broken. A single sticky note was affixed to the top corner. "You're ready." No signature, no initial, just 2 words that dropped into my chest like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a well. I let my hand hover, drew it back, then eased forward until my fingertips tested the fragile edge. I left the seal intact. That moment wasn't about the contents. It wasn't about confirmation. It was about presence. That folder, that note. They had shown up for me in a way no one at that party ever would. I rested my hand flat on the desk beside it. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I just stood there, letting the quiet stretch around me. The hum of the building pressed in, steady and unbroken, as if waiting for my next step. The overhead fluorescents carried that same hum into the East Wing hallway, buzzing faintly above me as I moved along the polished tile. The air held its usual trace of ammonia and overwarmed printer toner. My boots landed quietly, but the echo followed anyway, uninvited. I hadn't slept. The morning after the party didn't come with any clarity, just a sharper ache. I drifted the corridor on muscle memory, counting on tasks to settle the churn in my chest. At the far end, near the glass display case of retired medals, I caught sight of a small group gathered loosely around the coffee station. 4 officers, all high-ranking, and one of them, my father. I eased my pace to catch the cadence of their talk. Dorian's voice was lifted, not in command but in comfort. He was in storyteller mode, hand gesturing, chest slightly puffed. I didn't need to step closer to recognize the cadence. It was the same tone he used when reminiscing about his sheriff days, the same charm that drew people in, whether he earned their respect or demanded it. Colby's getting looked at by a few D1 schools. If he keeps his stats up, could be the first Scot to go national, he said, chuckling lightly. Someone whistled. That's impressive. Dorian nodded like a man receiving an award he hadn't asked for but expected. Kid's got vision. Discipline, too. 15 feet from them, I might as well have been glass. I waited, just long enough for the gap to feel like something deeper than distance. Then one of the officers glanced up. Recognition flickered in his eyes, subtle, uncertain. He straightened a little. Didn't realize she was your daughter. A pause. Dorian didn't miss a beat. His head dipped in acknowledgement. Barely. Then, almost immediately, he turned back to the others. So anyway, Boise's got a great program. They've got a new coach this year, real sharp with his recruits. Their laughter carried the thread forward while I let mine fall silent. My breath tightened as I pivoted and kept walking. Not fast, just enough to remind myself I was still in motion. My pulse wasn't racing, but it moved differently now. The kind of rhythm that comes when your body recognizes you've just been erased without fanfare. Back in my office, I caught the door with my palm and let the latch settle. I stood in the silence for a moment before moving toward my desk. The room smelled like old carpet and cold coffee. A half-dead spider plant drooped from the windowsill. I reached for the drawer where I kept pens and found my gaze drifting upward. On the desk across from mine, Lisa's old station before she transferred, someone had set out a framed photo. It was nothing dramatic, just a smiling group. Parents, kids, matching holiday sweaters, a golden retriever in the middle with a bow on its head. Warm, cluttered, alive. I looked away quickly, but not before something pinched inside me. Unzipping the side pocket of my satchel, I slid my fingers inside until I felt the edges, rounded, familiar, soft with time. The photo was black and white, taken outside the barracks the day I graduated. Thayer had flown in without telling anyone. Showed up in jeans and an old ball cap, like he belonged there more than I did. In the picture, his arm rested across my shoulders. My smile hovered, unsure of its right to be there. His stayed steady, certain. I turned the photo over. The faint pencil line on the back, barely legible now, still read, Day 1. Start like you mean it. Pressure gathered at the bridge of my nose, but nothing slid loose. I slid the picture back into the pocket. My fingers lingered there, brushing against the letter still folded next to it. A breath pressed against my ribs, one I hadn't noticed holding. Then I sat, turned toward my screen, and opened the morning logs. The cursor blinked, patient as if daring me to type the truth I had chosen to leave out. The next morning, I found myself pushing open the glass door of the coffee shop off Route 17. The bell above it chimed faintly, folding into the smell of burnt bacon and stale jukebox silence. Marla was already in the corner booth, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers curled around a chipped mug that steamed faintly in the morning light. She gave no signal. She didn't have to. I slid into the seat across from her and let my hands rest on the table without saying a word. She took one look at me and raised an eyebrow. You okay? I let the question rest in the steam rising off the mug. Then I reached for the creamer and poured it into the cup Claire had already set down for me. I stirred, watched the cloud swirl and disappear into the black. Then I set it flat. He talked about Colby like he's the one who earned this uniform. Marla held my gaze, took a slow sip, and settled into the vinyl. Mine used to do the same, she said. Never mentioned I joined. But I went home once and saw my service ribbon framed next to his golf trophies. No label, no photo, just stuck there like a decoration he found at a yard sale. I scoffed softly. Did you ask him why? She shrugged. Didn't need to. Some men only know how to be proud in private. Saying it out loud feels like surrender to them. A beat passed. The jukebox clicked, as if trying to come to life, then gave up again. I saw your name, she said suddenly. I looked up. Marla held my gaze. On the Rear Admiral's short list. It came across my desk months ago. A small weight dropped into my gut. You're kidding. She shook her head once. They've been watching you. Your name wasn't a footnote. It was highlighted. Something in my chest shifted, sharp and fast. For weeks, years maybe, I'd secretly wondered if any attention I got was just quota filling. A token. The Navy had to promote someone, right? Maybe I was just convenient. But this, I swallowed. Why didn't you say anything? Because I knew you'd doubt it, she said, and I wanted you to see it for yourself. My hands were still around the coffee cup, but my grip had gone slack. Heat pooled into my palms, grounding me. Marla reached into her folder, the same tattered one she brought everywhere, and pulled out a folded paper. The edges were worn, like it had been carried around for a while. She slid it across the table. It's not official. It shouldn't have left the office, but it's the kind of thing you should carry. I hesitated before picking it up. My fingers unfolded it slowly, like it might vanish if I rushed. The header was stamped with Navy insignia. The language was formal, precise. Evaluations, commendations, final tier recommendation. And at the bottom, a name I hadn't expected to see, Rear Admiral Everson, signed in deep blue ink. I stared at it, reread the same paragraph twice. She handpicked you, Marla said you had command presence most people only develop after a decade at that level. Heat climbed my throat, and I kept quiet. I folded the paper again, neatly, carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. It's not the real ceremony, Marla added, but it's real enough. We let Claire's refills and the clatter from the kitchen carry the quiet. The scent of burnt bacon wafted in from the back. Outside, a truck passed, its tires hissing on wet pavement. Eventually, I broke the silence. I used to think if I worked hard enough, someone would just see it. You were never invisible, Marla said gently. You were just standing behind people who refused to turn around. I watched the wet pavement pale as the rain finally quit. My fingers brushed the edge of the folded document again. Marla let it be, sipping her coffee, eyes carrying the look of someone who knows the waiting and knows the stopping. I traced the rim of my cup once more before pushing it aside, the clink of ceramic against the table marking the end of our silence. By afternoon, that same clink still echoed faintly in me as I stepped into the prep hall. Metal folding chairs scraped into neat rows, podium wheels squeaked across tile, and hushed voices ricocheted between the rafters. A faint scent of furniture polish hung in the air, tangled with burnt coffee from a carafe someone had left near the registration table. I worked the left aisle near center stage, ticking names against assigned seats. My name was nowhere on the welcome banner, of course, only on the logistics sheet, scribbled in black pen beside Event Liaison, Hall Setup. I hadn't volunteered. I hadn't been asked either. The slot had simply been filled, like someone assumed I'd be there, quiet and competent, clearing the path for someone else's moment. I kept moving, clipboard down, chairs straightened, badge scanned at the side entrance. There was something strangely familiar about the rhythm, efficient, silent, invisible. Then I heard the doors open behind me. His voice carried first. Dorian still tall, still broad across the shoulders, still speaking like the room had been waiting for him to arrive. His words were threaded with the casual charm of someone used to commanding spaces without effort. "Captain Haynes," he greeted, shaking hands with a man I'd served with in Pensacola. "Still making the rounds, I see." "They haven't let you retire yet?" A round of low laughter followed. He cruised down the row, clasping shoulders and spinning stories as if the whole Navy were his barber shop. I stood by the rear table, adjusting a stack of briefing folders, waiting for him to catch up to me. I wasn't expecting much, a nod, a glance, some casual acknowledgement that I was part of this world he admired so much. He closed the gap to me, then angled past without a pause, didn't tilt his head, didn't even register my existence. Instead, he stopped next to a young recruit, barely 20, still creasing his collar out of nervous habit, and shook his hand with the same full grip and hearty laugh he gave to the men with stars on their shoulders. "Hell of a turnout," he said. I held the table's edge and let the moment pass. After a beat, I turned toward him. "You didn't even ask why I'm here." He barely glanced in my direction. "You're always around," he said flatly, like commenting on a vending machine in the hallway. "I figured it's just another logistics task." Then he turned back to the next officer, already shifting gears into another anecdote about Colby's latest training schedule, or someone's grandson making rank faster than expected. I stared at the spot where he'd been standing, heart slow and heavy. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was the realization that I wasn't being ignored. I was being categorized, filed away, reduced to a function. The person who makes the chairs line up and the podium mic work and the flag fold exactly right. Not a daughter, not a candidate, just a background detail. My fingers brushed the corner of the clipboard as if it might anchor me to the floor. "Commander Scott," someone whispered behind me. I turned. It was Ramos from the tech crew, holding a checklist in one hand and a headset in the other. He glanced toward my father, then leaned in. "Just a heads up. You're on the program now." I blinked. "I am?" He nodded quickly. "They sent in a revision last night. You're third from the end. Full honors." My breath snagged, enough to halt my next step. "Does he know?" Ramos winced. "He hasn't seen the revised run sheet." It didn't get printed in time. His team's still using the old version. So Dorian didn't know. He didn't know I'd be called on stage, didn't know the spotlight would shift to me in a matter of hours, didn't know that every hand he'd shaken today would soon turn to face the name he couldn't bring himself to say. I let Ramos's words hang and rode out the swell under my ribs. I nodded once and turned back toward the rows of chairs, letting my gaze move past the banners, past the podium, to the flags posted at the corners of the room. Marla entered through the side, wearing her uniform jacket and that quiet look she always wore when she knew something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Her eyes found mine, and she gave the smallest nod. Words weren't necessary. Her small nod covered it. My hand stayed steady and my shoulders loose. I repositioned the briefing folders on the table, adjusted the edge of the tablecloth that had started to bunch at the corner. But in that stillness, something inside me shifted, like steel warming under pressure. I let my hand linger on the fabric one last second before pulling it away. That same hand later pushed open the door to my quarters. The space wasn't much, just a twin bed, a metal wardrobe, and a desk that groaned whenever I leaned on it. Still, it was mine. And that night, the walls held a strange sort of quiet. Not the kind that offered peace, but the kind that hovered, like the air was waiting for something to be decided. I stood at the foot of the bed, half dressed in my regulation whites. The jacket hung from the door of the wardrobe, still crisp from the dry cleaner's fold. My fingers traced the lapel without lifting it. The collar pin hadn't been fastened yet, neither had the rank insignia. They rested on the nightstand beside my wristwatch and the key card I hadn't used in 3 days. I crossed the room and opened the wardrobe. A low creak echoed as the door swung wide, revealing the wax-sealed envelope I'd tucked between 2 folded sweatshirts, still sealed, still intact. My hand hovered over it, then closed around the envelope like I was testing its weight. It didn't feel heavy. It never had. But something about it still pulled at my ribs like it might tip the balance between becoming and pretending. I balanced it in both hands for several breaths, studying the unbroken red seal. I kept the wax unbroken. Instead, I sat down at the edge of the bed, envelope resting lightly on my knees. The uniform jacket shifted on the door, its sleeves swaying slightly from the breeze coming through the barely cracked window. Outside, the air was cool. The trees rustled like a whisper I couldn't quite make out. I leaned forward to pick up my undershirt, and something slipped free from the jacket's inner pocket. Paper flicked to the floor beside my boot and lay face down. I bent to retrieve it. The edges had curled inward over time, and the once white paper had faded to a warm gray. I knew the photo before I turned it over. Me and Thayer, outside the OCS barracks. his arm slung over my shoulder, me in my dress blues, still too stiff with pride to relax. His smile was easy. Mine? Unsure. Like I hadn't figured out yet if I deserved to wear the uniform I'd fought so hard for. I flipped the photo. There, along the bottom edge in faint pencil, was a line I hadn't noticed before, or maybe I had, and just never let myself read it. Day 1. Start like you mean it. Thayer's handwriting, slanted, precise. Not underlined, not circled. Just there, like it had always been waiting for the right moment to be seen. I let air out through my nose and traced the pencil line, smudging it slightly. My throat tightened. Not from grief, not this time, but from something older, something rooted in the years I'd spent trying to earn a nod that never came. I set the photo gently on the desk. Then I picked up the jacket, pulled it off the hanger, and slid it onto my arms. The fabric carried more weight now, not from cloth, but from years stitched into it. Every late night, every dismissal, every moment I kept moving when no one was watching. I buttoned the front slowly, smoothing the lines as I went. I reached for the envelope one last time, held it in the center of my palm, still sealed, still waiting. Opening it wasn't required, because the decision had already been made, not just by whoever signed the form, but by me. I tucked the envelope into my inner breast pocket behind the folded photo. My fingers brushed the edge of Thayer's words again. Then I fastened the collar, clipped on the insignia, and looked at myself in the small mirror above the desk. My mouth stayed calm and my shoulders unarmed. Outside, the wind shifted. The blinds trembled softly. I reached for my belt, buckled it into place, and grabbed my cover from the hook beside the door. The hallway was quiet when I stepped out. Lights dimmed, voices hushed in nearby rooms. My boots kept an even cadence on the tile, not chasing or proving, only advancing. I followed that rhythm all the way down the corridor until the glow ahead began to sharpen. The glow spilled through a thin run of cheap canvas stretched between aluminum rods, light bleeding past as if it refused to be kept out. Harsh white beams cut clean lines across the floor at my feet, angled perfectly toward the stage just a few paces away. From where I stood, I could make out the shape of every officer seated in the first few rows. Some shifted in their seats, some checked their watches. The sound of rustling programs and nervous coughs filled the air, low and rhythmic, like a machine warming up. I pinched the collar straight again and let my hands fall. Marla held position at my left, arms folded, gaze pinned to the crowd. Her mouth hadn't moved in 5 minutes, but I could feel her presence like a wall beside me, solid, immovable. She didn't speak unless it mattered. That's why I trusted her. That's why, when my father stepped into view, I didn't say a word at first. He swept in from the rear doors, navy sport coat sharp, shoes bright, wearing the rehearsed smile he trusted most, the kind that wasn't just for greeting, it was for performing, for claiming a space, for making sure people knew he belonged in it. He paced down the aisle like the next name would be his. I watched him shake hands, saw the familiar pattern of shoulder taps, confident nods, the way he leaned in just slightly when he wanted to emphasize a punchline. A few officers laughed louder than necessary. Others nodded with vague politeness. He pulled out his wallet at one point, held up a photo of Colby, the kid with the scholarship. The one Dorian always said had discipline in his bones. His eyes stayed on faces in the aisle, never lifting toward the stage. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and let the dryness pass. "He knows I'm on the list?" I asked quietly. Marla didn't look at me. "He saw the program." I blinked. "Then why?" She cut in, voice low. "He just doesn't believe it." The air between us thickened, not awkward, just weighted. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Just another chapter in the book he never read with my name on the cover. But Marla shifted her stance slightly, eyes still on the room. "He submitted a correction," she murmured. I angled to the stage again. What? A few days ago, he called the admin office directly, said your name must have been included by mistake, told them to revise the print version. My chest didn't tighten. My vision didn't blur. It was worse than that. I went still. Marla continued. They flagged it. Ran it up the chain. The request was denied. Your nomination's already confirmed. I didn't ask why he'd do it. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough over the years to know the difference between absence and erasure. I stood there, jaw slack, not from shock, but from something colder. He didn't just doubt my name belonged. He tried to make sure no one else would see it at all. The lights had shifted slightly, painting the curtain in ripples of brightness. I could hear someone tapping a mic. A voice echoed faintly in the distance. Sound check, maybe. Announcements would begin soon. I slipped a finger under the top button, unhooked it, then cinched it closed again, slower. Gave my shoulders one sharp roll and let them settle. Across the room, Dorian was laughing again, that same laugh, like nothing in the world could reach him. My arms fell loose. My fist tightened once and opened. It wasn't anger tightening my fingers. It was space. Space finally clearing itself out inside me, making room for something that didn't include waiting for him to notice. Her nod said everything. I stepped forward, one foot just into the glow of the stage light. The air ahead pressed warm and sharp against my face as the curtain inched upward. The rising curtain gave way to the announcer's voice, cutting through the hall, every word measured, moving towards something that mattered. Rear Admiral Scott. A full beat held, the kind that lets your body register what your ears already heard. The room erupted. Applause broke like a dam giving way, immediate, thunderous, and nothing like the rehearsed clapping that had filled the room before. I wasn't prepared for the sound, not because I hadn't dreamed of it, but because I'd stopped expecting it would ever come from this place. I stood from the third row. My knees didn't buckle, though they could have. The room around me blurred into shapes and shoulder patches, unfamiliar faces turning, necks craning. The only thing I could focus on was the path ahead, straight up the center aisle, lit just enough by the overheads to feel exposed, but not blinding. As I walked, the applause continued, not waning, not forced. It didn't swell dramatically. It just stayed steady, certain, like the room had made up its mind. The stage felt taller than it had during the sound check that morning. The steps gave a small creak under my boots, and I kept each stride even. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I just kept moving. When I reached the platform, the commanding officer turned toward me. A man I barely knew. Our careers had only intersected briefly, but his expression was one of quiet acknowledgement. He didn't overplay it, didn't put on a show. He reached for the velvet box on the table beside the podium, opened it with practiced ease, and removed the insignia. He closed the gap and pinned it to my jacket with steady hands. I felt the metal press against the fabric, not heavy but weighted, right above my heart. Then he leaned in, voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You've been ready a long time," he said. "This just made it official." My mouth held neutral, but something settled inside me, like a piece of foundation locking into place. He stepped aside. I turned to face the audience. The lights tightened and found the podium. A hush swept over the hall. Real, collective, earned. My fingers gripped the edge of the lectern as I leaned slightly forward. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't excited either. What I was clear. "I used to think being seen meant being worthy," I said, letting the words come out slow and natural, like I was speaking to no one and everyone at once. That if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, did all the right things, someone would eventually turn and say, "She belongs here." No shuffle, no cough. Even the side flags held still. But I waited a long time for that moment. And all it did was make me smaller, quieter, invisible. I took a breath, not for drama, for air, My brother wrote me a letter once, the only one that ever mattered. I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out the folded paper. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. But I held it between my fingers. Let them see it. He said, "You don't need permission to be enough." I let the words hang in the room. The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was sacred. Then the applause started again, fierce, full-bodied. This time I didn't flinch. I didn't tuck my chin like I used to in other rooms when attention felt too bright. I stood tall and accepted it. I eased back from the mic, gave the CO a single nod, and walked off the stage. As I passed, several officers stood. A few reached out to shake my hand. One woman, eyes glassy, whispered, "About damn time." But no glance went toward the front row. No search for my father. I knew exactly where he was sitting, and I also knew he wasn't clapping. His approval wasn't needed. The side corridor widened, and my steps clicked across the polished concrete in a calm, even tempo. The nameplate on my chest caught the stage lights and bounced a thin reflection along the wall. Rear Admiral Scott, not Lieutenant, not the girl from logistics, not Colby's aunt. My name, in full. And this time, it didn't belong to someone else's story. It belonged to mine. The service hallway ran colder than the stage. Fluorescent buzz tinted the concrete a pale blue. Distant voices ebbed with each step until only boot strikes against tile remained. The ceremony had ended. The crowd shifted toward the reception area, and the applause, the one that had wrapped around me like armor, had dissolved into quiet memory. Cutting the corner by the service corridor, I halted. He was standing there. Dorian alone, back against the cinder block wall. One hand braced flat near his side, the other hanging limp by his belt. His eyes found mine before there was any chance to pretend I hadn't seen him. His certainty slipped, and it showed in the set of his shoulders. He straightened slightly as I approached, but he didn't speak. Not at first. Just took me in like he was trying to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with the version of me he'd kept in his mind all these years. When I stopped a few feet away, the space between us went clear, cold, like stripped linen. His voice cracked slightly when he finally spoke. "I didn't realize it was you up there." I held his stare. "You read my name." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You read it. You saw it printed. You heard it spoken. You just didn't want it to be true." His shoulders sank, barely, but enough to register. He tried, then shook his head. "I thought if I acknowledged you, it meant admitting I failed you before." The confession sat between us like a blade laid flat. I let the moment linger. He didn't continue. Maybe he thought that one sentence was enough. Maybe it was all he had. He wasn't cruel, he was systematic, meticulous, a man who spoke in systems and structures, who understood duty better than affection, a man who believed that ignoring something long enough was the same as solving it. He had not come to repair a thing, only to justify the years of not trying. I didn't answer him right away. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the folded paper that had followed me through every base, every deployment, every time I thought I might unravel without it. The letter, the one Thayer had written when I finished officer candidate school, the one I read in my car while parked under a streetlight in Georgia, hands trembling from the weight of being celebrated by no one. I stepped forward. Dorian flinched, not visibly, but internally. I could see it in the way his jaw locked, in the way his gaze flicked briefly to my hand. I set the letter in his palm. "This," I said softly, "kept me alive more times than you'll ever know." He glanced down, then back at me. "You can have it. I don't need it anymore." He didn't reach out to grasp it. His fingers closed around it instinctively, like they had a mind of their own. He stared at the envelope as if it had something to say to him directly, something he'd missed in every family photo, every skipped ceremony, every unspoken compliment passed to someone else. I left the moment untouched and offered no resolution. I didn't ask why he had tried to strike my name from the program, or why he hadn't said a word after the applause. Some truths don't require confrontation, they just require distance. And this one had already grown into a shape I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit. His lips parted, maybe to apologize, maybe to call me by name. But I turned, not out of spite, but because the weight of his presence no longer held gravity. My stride carried me past a stack of unused programs, still rubber-banded together, my name printed on every cover. Behind me, the hallway swallowed the sound of his breath. The fluorescent lights stayed steady, casting everything in a light too sterile for forgiveness. The next space met me with a hum of polite conversation, chair legs scraping, heels ticking over polished concrete. A slow instrumental track spilled from overhead speakers, brass heavy and ceremonial, but softened now, like it knew its job was almost done. From the side corridor, I slipped back into the hall. Stage lights dimmed but not yet gone out, stretched faint shadows across the rows of empty seats, spilling over the flags still standing at attention on either side of the platform. Most people had drifted toward the reception tables at the back, forming clusters of small talk, champagne flutes in hand. Camera flashes pulsed like tiny sighs. A few remained behind, leaning in for handshakes and quiet thanks, the kind exchanged between people who'd served too long to need words. I moved down the center aisle toward Dorian's row. His seat, second from the left, angled perfectly toward the podium, was still there, unmoved, unclaimed. On the cushion sat a folded program, edges aligned with a kind of rigid care, like someone had placed it down expecting to return, but hadn't. I stood in the aisle, letting the geometry of it imprint itself in my memory. The curve of the seat back, the small shadow where his shoulder should have been, the hollow echo of an applause he'd chosen not to join. I left the chair untouched. Instead, I stepped into the row behind it and lowered myself into the seat directly behind his. My skirt met the upholstery with a muted press. I sat there for no audience and no point to prove, my hands folded loosely in my lap, uncoached. Around me, voices rose and thinned like tide against tile. The room had already moved past me, past the announcement, past the title. I didn't mind, I didn't need the linger. I settled into the chair and let its straight back support my spine. In the space between my shoulder blades, I could still sense the touch of the insignia being pinned in place, the weight of it quiet but sure. A lieutenant brushed my sleeve as he passed. "Congratulations, Admiral," he said, voice casual, reverent only in its simplicity. I nodded. No smile, no reply. The chair in front of me remained empty. Not absence, an admission, a silent reckoning. No apology, no confrontation. Just the quiet, final fact of him not being there. He hadn't stayed to explain himself, hadn't stayed to revise the program, hadn't waited to see if I'd look for him. I hadn't. And yet, that empty chair, its straight line, its untouched paper, had more presence than he ever managed to give me. I looked down at the program still resting on the cushion. My name was there, centered in black ink, flanked by ranks I had bled into. A thin layer of dust already threaded its way into the crease. I didn't pick it up. Behind me, the last attendees drifted through the main doors. Brass music fizzled into silence, leaving the hall with that post-event stillness, the kind where walls seem to breathe out. Sunlight poured through the high windows, late afternoon gold, warm and indifferent. It struck the empty seat with precision, touching the cushion, the armrest, the folded program left behind. Then the light slid sideways across the row, reaching my lap, my joined hands, the insignia anchored to my chest. I looked down, and there, cast long and steady, my shadow stretched forward over the chair he'd abandoned. It didn't fill the space. It claimed nothing. yet it landed there anyway. The corridor outside the auditorium had gone quiet. What drifted in from the reception was faint, muted laughter, a glass clink, footsteps tapping tile far away. Here, though, stillness held its ground, the kind that demands honesty. Marla and I waited beneath a low amber sconce. Its glow traced soft shadows across her cheekbones, and I caught the way her fingers rested loosely under the edge of her belt. She hadn't spoken much since the ceremony. She didn't need to. The hush between us wasn't heavy. It simply settled. She tipped her chin toward me. "You okay?" I nodded, not out of habit, because I was. Then motion pulled our eyes down the corridor. Dorian. He waited at the far end under a sickly bulb that hummed on and off. His sport coat hung looser than usual. His shoulders sloped. No entourage, no handshake in progress, no rehearsed story sliding from his grin. Just him, alone, holding the letter. The envelope, creased, worn, addressed in Thayer's handwriting, remained sealed, untouched, like something sacred or cursed, maybe both. He stayed put. I didn't speak, didn't lift my chin or shift my weight forward. I held my ground and kept my voice level. "I didn't know what to say," he said, scraped a small sound from his throat, then fell silent again. "That's all right," I said. I wasn't waiting anymore. His eyes dropped to the envelope. One finger moved slightly, grazing the edge. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but it never made it past his lips. The quiet came back, and it lay flat instead of burning. His expression didn't crack, but the structure underneath had shifted. It was in the way his mouth pinched. In the tilt of his head, his certainty slipped, and it showed in the set of his shoulders. He didn't ask what was in the letter. He didn't apologize for trying to erase my name from the program. He didn't say my name, and I didn't need him to. I stepped forward just enough and set the letter in his palm. Not to comfort, not to punish, just to let go. He closed his hand around it automatically, gaze locked on the paper like it might accuse him aloud. But it didn't. That wasn't its job. I left the moment untouched and offered no resolution. I turned away at a measured pace. He didn't call after me. He didn't follow. And I didn't look back. Many chase closure in answers. Mine arrived when I set down the question. As I neared the end of the corridor, steadier light replaced the flickering. The exit sign glowed above the double doors, humming faintly. A young ensign rounded the corner from reception and stopped short. His eyes went wide, then narrowed with respect as he clicked his boots and saluted sharply. "Rear Admiral." I returned the nod, kept walking. The door opened just before I reached for it. Marla stood there, coffee in hand. She didn't smile, didn't tilt her head, just offered the paper cup in silence. I took it. The heat seeped into my palm. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor behind me. Did he say anything? I took a sip. It was bitter, solid, right. He said enough. She didn't press, and I didn't elaborate. We walked out together, fluorescent hum fading behind us, the letter still sealed in a hallway that had held too many versions of me. Only one had walked away. The bench gave a small creak as I shifted, and the morning chill seeped into the wooden slats. Fog still lay low across the lake, curling upward in pale ribbons that blurred the line between water and sky. The quiet stayed put. Like it, too, had no intention of leaving. It wasn't a burial flag, no one had died. This one, folded with precision, had been handed to me at the close of the ceremony. Not for grief, for honor, for something I used to think I'd never earn unless someone else gave me permission. I let a thin breath thread into the haze. The fabric across my lap held shape. Sharp creases, corners tucked just right. Whoever folded it knew how to handle things that mattered. This was the same bench where Thayer and I once shared burnt coffee years ago. He'd kicked his boots out in front of him, smiled sideways, and told me the mist made the lake look like it was breathing. "You don't have to earn space," he'd said. "You just take it." I hadn't known how back then, or maybe I'd known, but I was waiting for someone to tell me I was allowed. The minutes here felt wide, or maybe I finally stopped crowding them. Images filtered in without warning. Marla's eyes as I stepped on stage, her stillness, the nod, the chair Dorian left behind, program folded like an apology never spoken, the nameplate glinting in stage light. I hadn't waited for him to fill it, and I refused the chair's shadow. The wind picked up slightly. My collar lifted. I adjusted it absent-mindedly, reminded that I still wore the uniform, not out of duty, not out of obligation, but choice. A young officer came by on the path, slowed and stopped. His gaze caught the insignia on my jacket. He saluted. "Ma'am?" I nodded once. Quiet, sure. Not a smile for show, a smile earned in stillness. He moved on. I stayed. From my bag, I pulled a small photo frame, edges worn, plastic backing dulled. I eased the back open and slid the photo out. Thayer and me. The barracks in the background, his arm around my shoulder, my smile cautious, his steady. I replaced it with a newer print. Same moment, just clearer now, less grainy, less faded, less afraid. On the back of the frame, a new note appeared, unsigned in his unmistakable hand. "Thank you for not waiting." I didn't need it to forgive or to finish, but I kept it, because it reminded me that I no longer carried the question. The sunlight broke clean through the trees. One golden shaft stretched to where I sat and landed across the insignia on my jacket. Rear Admiral Scott. No footsteps ahead, no map, no one left to stand in the way. I slid the flag into my bag. It fit easily now, not because it had changed size, but because I'd stopped gripping it like proof. The lake exhaled mist again. A breeze stirred the branches. I sat still, unhidden, unshrinking. Enough. Many spend a lifetime waiting to be called by name. I did too. Then I stopped. I used to believe that being seen by the people who raised me was the only kind of recognition that mattered. But standing where I am now, I've learned that some forms of acknowledgement will never come. And that's okay. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop waiting and start living like we already deserve the space we take up. What about you? Have you ever let go of someone's approval and found peace on the other side? If this story touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, quiet human stories, ones that remind us we're never truly alone.